them put a testimonial on Google for you. I mean, so there's so many things you can do. You post that video on social media, on your website, have them put a testimonial after the video, put that testimonial, have them put a testimonial on Google so that when people go and look for reviews, they see the same couple that they just saw on Google. That builds more trust. So there's a lot of things you can do to, but these ideas have to be consistent over a period of time, because one is not, how many people are even going to see that one. So
Totally.
you've got to be consistent with your content and mix it up. So you can do stories, you can do written, you can do audio. So there's a lot of things you can do, just to be where your ideal customer is the biggest takeaway. You want to be where they are and continue to provide consistent content that will resonate with them.
Wanna cause no problems. I just wanna live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but you know when you see imposters, we know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you wanna talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you walk and your talk is constant.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Death to Vanilla podcast. I'm your host Steven with Breakout Creative Agency, and today we have Shondell, and man, I'm excited to have you on because you operate in really an industry that most people would describe as pretty square with the financial industry. And so I'm super excited to hear kind of like how you navigate all that, how you're creative in those kinds of environments and manage some of those relationships. So I'm super excited to have you on. So if you could just do a little bit of a little brag on yourself a little bit and give us a little intro and a little bit of backstory to yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your show today. I'm originally from Canada, born and raised in Toronto. And I started working in the financial industry when I was 18. I worked for a company by the name of Bank of Montreal. They're the oldest bank in Canada. And then I worked my way up there, and then I left there and I started working for a company called Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. They're the same thing as PMI here in the US. And then while I was there, I had paid off a couple mortgages. So I bought my first property when I was 20. And then a few years after that, I had bought a rental property. And then in about 11 years, I think it was 11 years, I paid off both of those mortgages. So one of my girlfriends, I told maybe 3 people, and one of my girlfriends suggested that I start, helping other people to do the same thing, and people who may not know, how to get a mortgage, buy a house for the first time, buy a rental property, things like that. She was just really, really encouraging me to, try to help other people do the same thing. And I thought, yeah, why not? So she suggested that I start blogging. And that's what I did. I didn't even know what blogging was when she told me about it. No clue. I was just so like, I was just into my job. And that was it. Like I was fine there. Even though I wasn't completely fulfilled and I knew I wanted more, I just didn't know what that looked like. So when she suggested blogging and I started reading about what that was, then I taught myself how to build my own website. And after I did that, I just started blogging about my experience. And I started to become a part of the whole personal finance community. And then that just led to radio stations started contacting me and magazines wanted to hear my story. And then that all led to me working with a lady by the name of Gail Vaz-Oxlade. So she would be the Susie Orman, but of Canada. And once I started working with her, that's when a lot of companies started to contact me. She had at the time like 3 television shows on TV. So she's a huge brand in Canada. So when I was attached to her, it just put me in front of her audience as well. Plus she had a radio show that she did. So she brought me on her radio show. So that just gave me a lot of exposure. And really, really nice lady. We're still friends to this day. And then companies started contacting me and wanting me to write for them. Now I was still working at Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation at the time. So I wasn't able to handle all of the work that I was getting. So my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, he suggested that I hire some writers. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. Why don't I just do that? Like, it didn't even occur to me that I should do that. Because I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs or business owners at all. Like I've just always been around people who worked for companies. So this is all new to me. Like this is not something I had thought to pursue. It was just something that was happening. And I thought, well, why not continue with it? Because I love talking to people. And if I can help some people, why not? So that's what ended up happening. And then I started hiring writers. And then eventually the business was just making more money than Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation was paying me. And I thought, well, we have something here. I could just quit the job. And that's really how the business was born. So we focus on financial institutions simply because that's where I come from.
Yeah.
My whole career was within the financial industry. And what I noticed was the main reason why I really wanted to focus on financial institutions is because when I was blogging about paying off my mortgages and stuff like that, I realized that a lot of people were coming to me for advice, but not coming to me for advice because I worked in the industry. They were coming to me for advice because of my experience in buying property young and paying off my mortgages and things like that. So I realized there was a disconnect between all of the information that were in banks and how that was getting to their ideal customer, because their ideal customer was coming to me for advice. But the reason why they were coming to me is because I was in front of them online. And that's where I was. So I knew there was a bridge that needed to be created to fill that gap so that the financial institutions can communicate with their ideal customers. And I knew how to do that simply because I was blogging. So that's really how the business was born.
That's amazing for two reasons. One is that I love anytime, because like really anyone that has a business is to solve a problem, right? And so you kind of almost accidentally really discovered the problem that the banks had, which is really cool because you were in there in the trenches making it happen. And so it kind of presented itself to you as you were doing the work, which I think is really cool. And then two, you were so right? So like, when we were talking and I was doing some of the research on you as well, it's just this idea that like as someone yourself who's building a business, you can't just be like, hey, just buy my stuff. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know what I mean? But that's kind of what a bank's doing. They're like, you should bank with us. Why? Because we do checking accounts.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's super compelling.
And so does every other bank.
Yeah, like, oh, like our service fee of $5 less, and like maybe that'll work for someone, but that's not super compelling. Certainly not a reason to go on a website, unless you're just happen to be researching because you're ready to pick a bank or whatever. But interesting that So did you find that by and large they had no like value added content in general?
What I found was the relationships weren't being built.
Okay.
The reason why people were coming to me is because they felt like they knew me, because I was telling my story. I've been on both sides of the fence. I was a mortgage loan originator for years. So I knew exactly the lender mindset. I knew exactly what they had to do to qualify. Then I was also a consumer. I still am a consumer. So
Right.
I was on both sides of the fence. So I was able to give their customers both sides of the fence, what the lender is looking for and what you should do to get a mortgage and pay it off and how to buy rental property and things like that. So I was able to give them both sides. And people just enjoy that. People want to see real life stories that they can relate to, because then they feel like, they're a part of what they want, and then they can go and get it, right? I think the disconnect was just kind of treating people like they are people and not a number. Because a lot of times customers feel like they're a number, especially with some of the big institutions. They've just got so many customers. And it's kind of like the best way I always describe it to them is you can have 1,000 friends, but when you are talking with one, they need to feel like they're your only friend. And that's what it comes down to. You can have 1,000,000 customers, but each one needs to feel like they are important to you. You need to figure out a way to build a relationship with them. And the great thing about institutions is you have customers from, their teenagers till death. Like you've got products to help them from their kid until, retirement. So, but but in order to keep them that long, you have to be a part of their journey. And the only way you can be a part of their journey is if you have a relationship with them. And the only way you can have a relationship with someone is if you get to know them. And you have to get to know who they are and where they are and stick with them on their journey. And that comes from being consistent with the content that you put out there. And the content that you put out there should be based on what they want to know. And that, like I said, and one way to do that is to join Facebook groups and find out exactly what your ideal customer wants. There's Facebook groups for everything. There are literally Facebook groups for everything. First-time home buyers, repeat buyers. I'm a part of some of them. So I can name some great Facebook groups that, the institutions should be a part of, and just sit there and listen. What do your ideal customers want? Like, just be a fly on a wall and figure out what they want and then create content to solve those problems.
Yeah, it's so funny that businesses want to scale, but they don't always necessarily have a a way to retain clients. And it's like you said, like they're only a lifelong customer if they decide to stick around with you long term. And a second a relationship builds, if there wasn't one there to begin with, then what
Yes.
reason do they have to stay? And it's got to be cheaper for them to just keep the customer than get a new one.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's like,
Yeah, because think about it. I mean, it is so much easier. I mean, just in business in general. I mean, the cost to get a new customer versus the cost to keep a customer and upsell them. Obviously, it's a little bit more money. But the great thing with institutions is, your goal should be to once you have a client, how could I get their child? How could I get their uncle? How could I get their sister? How could I get their family?
right,
Because everybody needs a bank in some area of life. Everyone's going to buy a car, get a credit card, get a line of credit, get a loan, buy a house. I mean, there is just like so much products that everybody pretty much has some type of banking product, right?
sure.
A bank account, something. So it's very, I wouldn't say easy, but if you take a holistic approach and be strategic, you can get the entire family and keep them if you remain top of mind and if you continue to build those relationships with them. People want to be loyal to people they like. I
Yeah.
mean, why would you leave? And price is not always the differentiator, right? I'll pay more money because I have a better relationship with you than pay less because I don't know this person, right? There's a sense of loyalty when you have a relationship with someone that
Absolutely.
that surpasses price.
Yeah, because I mean, at some point, the banks are pretty competitive. There can't be that
Exactly.
much difference.
Exactly. So it's not like as if, one bank is, offering like 20% and another bank's offering 3, unless you go with a hard money lender or something like that. But for the
Sure.
most part, financial institutions, their rates are, right in and around the same. So the differentiator is relationships. The differentiator is how well do you know your customer and how well do they know you?
Right. So after you started understanding the customers better for them, what kind of like tactically, like what kind of things did you actually find were building the connections really well? So like you obviously have it with the content you were putting out, where it was like really personal and stuff like that. And I don't know. I feel like a bank would really have a hard time being like super personal because you obviously are a human being that's interacting with people, and a bank can't necessarily put so and so as the face of something because that person may not stick around or whatever else, as opposed to you being the business owner.
Yeah.
So how do they navigate that like personalness
By
from a business standpoint?
by telling customer stories.
Okay,
By telling customer stories. So if you're focused on first time home buyers, do a video on, Joe and Sarah who have been saving for the past 5 years to buy their house. And now you guys came along and helped them move into that dream home. So create the picture and tell the story because that will resonate with all of the other young couples that right now that may not have enough money. Then you can start talking about, well, you only have to put down X amount of money. There's these products that can help you. So you can still get into the products, but tie it to the story, tie it to the emotion. And that's a perfect way to do that. How did you help, this couple get into their dream home? And there's many ways you can twist that and turn that in, but that's how I would, um, do that is just use your own customers that you've helped and create a story and do a video or videos work really, really well because it just helps to, tie to the emotion even more. Kind of like when we watch movies and we cry. So, well, me, maybe not
like
you.
a good
But,
comes on, you're like, oh no.
but yeah, so that's one way to connect with the audience through your own customers. And then you have them put a testimonial on Google for you. I mean, so there's so many things you can do. You post that video on social media, on your website, have them put a testimonial after the video, put that testimonial, have them put a testimonial on Google so that when people go and look for reviews, they see the same couple that they just saw on Google. That builds more trust. So there's a lot of things you can do but these ideas have to be consistent over a period of time because one is not how many people are even going to see that one. So
Totally.
you've got to be consistent with your content and mix it up. So you can do stories, you can do written, you can do audio. So there's a lot of things you can do. Just to be where your ideal customer is the biggest takeaway. You want to be where they are and continue to provide consistent content that will resonate with them.
No, that makes total sense. For me, I always think of personal as being like someone being the face of something like that, one-to-one connection. But that makes sense too. That way, they're not having a the potential customer is not having a connection with a certain individual that may or may not be around next year. They're having it with
it's the brand,
a customer, a human being that's like them, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's the brand. Who started? Was it Phil Knight that started Nike? Was that his name?
I'm not familiar, no.
Anyways, but Nike, when you think of Nike, you're not thinking you're gonna actually try to build a relationship with, the creator or the CEO. It's the brand. It's how the brand makes you feel, right? Just do it. It's motivational. It's, if I buy Nike shoes, I feel like I can, play basketball like Michael Jordan or LeBron, right? It's how it makes you feel. It's how the brand, but not necessarily how, the owner or how the founder of Nike makes you feel. It's the brand in and of itself. And that's through stories, right? They tell stories of athletes.
Yeah.
That's why we connect, because we want to kind of be like the athletes, right? So that's what they're doing is the exact same thing that I'm describing. They're telling the stories of their customers, and that will resonate with future potential customers. That's all the big brands do that. They create stories so it resonates with their ideal customer, and then it makes you feel like, you can be that. So you kind of want that, right?
Dude, that's crazy you bring that up because I've been very slowly making my way through the Netflix documentary, The Last Dance, that covers like the Bulls and Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
First of all, that documentary is amazing.
Yeah.
And so well done. But yeah, so I just watched the episode where they talked about Michael Jordan making the deal with it was Nike, right? That he made the deal with.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think he wanted to do Adidas, but then ended up doing Nike instead for some reason. And I think I don't know. Yeah, I think that was one of their campaigns was the Be Like Mike campaign.
Yes, yeah.
Where that's like literally what it was. Where it was like how more obvious could you get that you're like, okay, you want to be like him, wear this shoe, like
the Jordan logo with him dunking, like that's so unforgettable.
Like, there's nothing subtle about it. Like they're not even insinuating that like you're buying it because you want to be someone like someone. They're like you do want to buy it because you exactly want to be like Mike.
Exactly.
And it's just so funny. It's just so overt. But anyway, so totally that makes so much sense that. Yeah, it's those stories and those connection points, and rather than a physical specific person, obviously it was Michael Jordan, but like over a period of time, it's not just one specific person. It's the brand.
Yeah, and multiple people, right? Yeah. Because you've got to. That's another reason why it's nice to have stories, because you'll connect with different kinds of people, right? When you have these stories, you're like Nike, they sponsor so many different kinds of sports, different ethnicities, because what that does is it helps to connect with different kinds of people, right? So that's what the stories with the customers do. Have different kinds of customers from ethnic backgrounds, because then you draw in different kinds of people, right? And that's what you want. You want as many customers as you can get, and those are just some ways to create content that will resonate with different kinds of people.
Well, it's like that's perfect. Going back to what you were saying, not necessarily with like ethnic diversity, but age diversity, right? Where you were talking about like if a bank is offering products from people from birth to death, then like a retirement person has a different story than someone like you said who just bought a first time home, or a person who had their first kid or is on their third home, or opening up their first savings account. Each of them have a different story. So that's kind of interesting. So did you, because of the fact that you had experience in the financial industry, because to me, that just seems like just an insane amount of research to really understand very well, like someone's journey, their entire lives through a financial institution. That seems like a lot of a lot of stories and a lot of like understanding and a lot of Facebook groups to understand what that looks like. So was that something you just picked up during your time at a financial institution, or did you spend just like an absurd amount of hours researching, potential products that people would want to interact with like throughout their entire life?
A combination of both. Because I started working in the bank at 18. So it's interesting how my life kind of just meshed with my career because I've always been on both sides of the fence.
Right.
I started in the industry at 18. So as a customer and as someone on the other side in the bank, I
Yeah.
was able to connect it really well because I was always on both sides until I left the bank to start my own business. And so I can still understand it because I just left, 6 years ago. So I just left the industry 6 years ago, but I'm still working with the industry. So
Right.
it kind of meshed really well. So I saw on both sides, what was lacking and what worked. So for me, I saw how they had the customers from, really early on until retirement. And then when I was a customer, I've always been a customer and still am. I'm a part of several Facebook groups that I tell my customers they need to be in. Like, for example, we invest a lot in real estate, and Bigger Pockets is a huge, in my opinion, one of the best Facebook groups. Everybody in there either owns property or is wanting to buy property. Most people cannot buy property with cash, which means
Right.
they need a mortgage,
Yeah.
which means you should be in there trying to get the business. So I mean, like, it's just, it's not rocket science, but sometimes it's just a matter of just kind of opening the door so they see the opportunity that's right in front of them. And
Absolutely.
your ideal customer is on Facebook, hands down. I know some of the owners of these groups. I know exactly the type of people that are in these groups. I've been a part of these communities since I started blogging, way back. So I can tell them that their ideal customer is right in there.
Yeah.
And how to get in there and get the business for them. So, and Facebook groups is not the only one. Like, there's forums, there's a lot of other things they can do as well. But Facebook groups, in my opinion, are the fastest way to really get to know your audience, especially if you're getting in groups that have a lot of people and are active daily. Because
Sure.
the more active the Facebook group is, the more patterns you'll be able to see. Because what you're looking for is patterns. To see what it is your ideal customer wants. And I always tell our customers, you want to segment your ideal customer. So if you're focused on first-time home buyers, go to a group with first-time home buyers. And
Oh yeah, 100%.
if you're focused on repeat buyers, then go somewhere where they're either wanting to buy a second home for a cottage, because that's different, right? People who are repeat buyers could either be real estate investors, or they could just be people who want to buy a second home for a cottage or a condo, like downtown or wherever. So
Sure.
those are completely two different audiences. They're not going to have the same types of questions at all. So really niching down into who it is you want to target, and get to know each of those segments, because they're all going to be different. And you can task different people for these things. So it is a lot if you're gonna, task one person, because I only suggest get into, 2 Facebook groups. Like, I'm not suggesting get into 25 Facebook groups.
Sure.
Get into the top 2. That's all you need. Get into the top 2, spend 20 minutes in there every day, task someone to spend 20 minutes in there every day. Very strategic in what they're doing, looking for certain patterns. I could even tell them how to search for certain things, just to make that 20 minutes, time well spent. And then just get in and get out. That you'll be surprised how much info you can get on your ideal customer in that short period of time. I'm a big believer in being a creator on social media rather than being just a consumer, right? Like, go in there with intention, because you can literally spend hours on Facebook and realize you've wasted 3 hours of your life. So you want to be strategic when you're going into these Facebook groups. And we got a little visitor.
Yeah, it's bound to happen. I pull out my computer and ignore them, and all of a sudden, I'm the most interesting person.
That's so cute.
Freaking cats, man. I feel like, I don't know. It's my life. So
that's okay. But yeah, that's what I suggest. Like that.
Yeah.
You can be strategic and really get to know who your ideal customer is.
No, I think that's great. To me, like, Facebook groups just make like the most sense. Like, I know you can go on Reddit and find subreddits and stuff like that, but to me, it's like Facebook is just like so. I don't know. It just makes sense to my brain. As far, like, I don't like Facebook per se, but Facebook groups, I think, are, like you said, a crucial research thing to be able to understand clients. And they're just. It's so easy to find groups. It's so easy to figure out if they're active. Like,
Yes.
And it's not some weird like endless sub threads and stuff like that. It's just I don't know. It's great. And you can search stuff. So if you can like see a keyword of something that
Yes,
someone says, you can search it and it'll pull up like every post that someone's
exactly.
ever brought that up on.
Yes.
So like when I was doing more like family and wedding photography, like if I was ever looking for engagement shoots, I could just like type in the word like engage or engagement shoot locations, and it would pull up any post that someone ever posted of like, hey,
Yes.
how about here, how about there, and it was a great research tool.
Yes.
So absolutely for you, for someone else who's like a like a CMO or something like that, to be able to drop in and spend a little bit of time, like you said, 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be an all day affair. Just 20 minutes every day to be able to go in and notice, like, hey, are people asking the same questions? Are people having the same problems? Are people asking
Mhm.
about the same influencers, the same platforms, the same whatever, and
Yeah.
then figuring them out.
Yeah. And
So
then bridge that gap. And then you want
yeah,
to always ask yourself, how could I serve this? How could I serve these people?
yeah,
Based on my skills, based on where I work, do I have anything that can help these people? Because that you always will have to be in the mindset of, you always have to be in the servant mindset. How
yeah.
can I help these people? And do I have something that I could offer them? Right. And when you go in with that mindset, I mean, then you start creating content to help them.
So my question for you is, and because this has been on my brain as we've been talking, I kind of have this like in my head. I have this like I don't know, like a graph or something like that, where on one side of the graph is like the most practical information you could possibly give someone that's helpful, right? So like these are the three things that you need to think about when getting a home loan or something like that, or like when applying for a mortgage for a first time home, right? That's like super practical, like super not cut and dry, I guess. And then on this side you have like content like um, should you if you buy a previously owned house, should you tear out the carpet and put it in tile instead? You know what I mean? What does that do with the value of your house? Where it's like it's still helpful. It's still a question a first time home buyer is going to ask themselves, like, oh, do I want to keep this carpet? Am I just going to have to live with it? Is it going to be is it going to raise the value of my house? Blah blah blah. That's something that someone's potentially going to ask as well. But it's
Yeah.
also something where like maybe like as it goes to like conversions for the company from blog post to customer, maybe it's not quite as clear. How do you feel like there's that kind of gap in content as far as conversions, or how close it is being practical, I guess? Do you see there being a difference? Do you think it's all the same? Do you give more attention to one than the other? Like, what's your kind of take on that?
So yeah, anytime you're putting content out there, it has to be tracked, or else you won't know if it's working or not. So
Sure.
in terms of written content, there's many ways you can track that. Google Analytics, Google Analytics will help you a lot in tracking content on your website. So you always want to know how many people are staying on your page, how long are they staying on your page, are they following through with the call to action? Do you have a contact number where they can go? Are they calling the contact number after they read the content? Are they filling out the content, the contact form? So all of that needs to be tracked, so you know if the content that you're putting out there is actually resonating with your ideal customer. That's the only way
Sure.
you'll know, is if you're looking at the analytics. And social media has a ton of analytics as well. Whether you're posting on LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever, you can get analytics from there as well to see how your content is resonating, because that's all that matters, is if because you're not writing content for yourself,
Sure.
you're putting out content for your customer. You're wanting it to be of value to them, and the only way to know if it's of value is if you're tracking it and paying attention to the analytics, because then you can make tweaks. If people are clicking off before they get to the call to action, so maybe we need to move the call to action up. Right. So there's little things you can do to tweak the content so that it is customized to exactly what your ideal customer wants, until you get that perfect, until you're dancing, that perfect rhythm with you and your customer, based on who you are as a brand, what you guys stand for, and the information that you're providing your customer, how that's resonating with them. And that's really what it is. It just becomes that perfect rhythm, but it takes time, right? Especially if you weren't consistent with the content, you've got to be consistent, and we got to continuously track exactly what's happening with it until we get to that rhythm where it's working, it's resonating with them. And then you just continue. And while we're writing the content, There's people that are constantly building those relationships to let us know exactly what they want to know, so then we can write the content, right? So it's a team effort, and it's a holistic approach
Right.
when it comes to any type of content, whether it's video, audio, written. It's always a holistic approach.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I meant by holistic, because I feel like there's this idea where, like, in this one circle, there's like things that the bank can do that is of value to a first time homeowner, but in like maybe like a related circle, there's like all the things that actually go through the mind of a first time home buyer, just to use them as a consistent example, right? And so like there's things that a first time homeowner is going to care about that had nothing to do with a bank, but they're still helpful for them. There's still questions they're really answering. And so
Yeah.
then I guess my question is it worth it for a bank to even post that kind of information, because there's no direct tie to like
Oh, yes.
filling out a form? And then so then I guess my question is do you believe in doing both, and then how much of each, right? Because obviously, like, if I not rent, if I write a blog post about like the top 3 trending colors to paint your new home, that is something a first time homeowner is going to research. It is
Yeah.
relevant, and they are asking that question. That has nothing to do with a bank, but at the same time, if that's driving traffic to a website, that's kind of a good thing too. So like, so I guess my question is how do you juggle that? Like, this doesn't quite convert into like filling out a form, but it does build a relationship.
Yes. So you've got to do both,
Okay.
because excuse me, you've got to mix up the content, and content that you don't want to be too forceful with the content, like
Sure.
just kind of put it in people's face, like, okay, call me now, because people, that doesn't resonate with people. So oftentimes the best content is not around products. You
Right.
don't really need to push products down people's throats, because like I said, most people can't afford to buy a house with cash, right? So eventually, like, they're going to have to get a mortgage. So if you're providing enough value, they will raise their hand and say, what are your rates? Can we do an application? If you're providing enough value, right? Why wouldn't they? You're giving them
Sure.
all of this information. So if you're giving them advice on different paint colors, or how they can possibly, convert their basement into a man cave. I mean, if you're giving tips on what people want to know, they will eventually raise their hand. If people constantly see you and you're constantly answering their questions, and questions that they're asking other people or themselves or friends or family, they're probably going to come to you when they're ready and say, you know what, I've been getting all this information from you. What are your rates? Or can we do an application? Or this is my situation. Do you think you can help? Right?
Right.
They'll come to you with something and that's a lead, right? That's a lead, and that's from the information that you're providing. So usually, most of the content we write is not product related. It
Right.
is more of what you said, things that don't necessarily have to do with an FHA mortgage or the rates, because that information people could just kind of find online. So the best way, I always say, to tie in products is if you're already talking like about a story, or if you're talking about something else, then you can let them know, after you've talked about what is going to help them, well, an FHA mortgage can help you in this particular situation, right?
Right.
So tie it into the value that you're bringing to them, rather than just making it all about you. It should never be about you, ever. It should always be about the customer.
Well, I was laughing with someone yesterday because we were talking about some video work we were doing, and I was like, for comparison, I was talking to him about how, like, I don't know, I read magazines all the time, and so I always told him that my favorite articles that, like, I both love and hate are the ones where, like, you're reading it and halfway through you realize it's an ad.
Yeah.
And because they hide like advertisement like in the top
Yes.
corner, and it's like in like size 5 font or something. And but because you're starting to read it and like, this is actually interesting, and like this has to do with the other content in this magazine. Like, it's a travel magazine and they're talking about traveling, but it's like a hotel ad, but
Yes.
they're telling a story about traveling and like adventuring and relaxing and wellness and all these other things. So you're reading it and you're like, oh wow, this is really interesting. And halfway through you're like, it's an ad, and I was like, I've been tricked. But at the same time, it's still like that value added, where it's like
Yeah.
they didn't make it like, we have the nicest rooms, our floors are the cleanest, we have the best customer service. You know what I mean? They weren't pushing anything. They
Yeah.
were telling a story and adding value. And I just think that's amazing. And I think that sometimes maybe unless you just don't do a very good job of connecting, like the attribution windows and stuff like that of like this equals this, and I promise. But this idea that like sometimes the content doesn't quite maybe in people's brains connect with like, how does this make me more money? But at the same time, it's like you said, it's that building that relationship, giving value, so that over a period of time someone feels like they gave you enough value, so when it comes to them making that decision, like you said, they have to get a loan, so they got to go somewhere. And then how do you attribute this effort and this value added with this person walked in the door? And I'm sure you have ways of tracking that, but I feel like that's sometimes a challenge for people to make that connection, that like all this money and time is being spent and it will pay off. I promise.
Yeah, because it's a long game.
Yeah.
But even paying attention. So even though the content that is on your website, it should still be tracked in terms of how much traffic it's bringing.
Sure.
There's different ways, like they don't necessarily have to call, but they can subscribe, right? So subscribing is a way to get them closer and into your funnel, right? So they can also download a checklist that you've created. They can download. So there's different things that you can do, because those are all call to actions, right? Subscribing, downloading the checklist, those are all call to actions. It's not just call this number. So there's different ways you can put call to actions in there, and then like I said, that's all tracked as well. So from the time they get to reading, most times they're not going to just read one piece of content and if they've never even heard of you,
sure,
just unless they are just focused on rate,
right?
Or price, I should just say, unless they're focused on price, right? Which is rate, then they may do that. If they're just price shoppers, which I always say, you want a stronger relationship than that, because they'll just leave you for that too, right? If they come to you just 100%. For that, they'll leave you just for that as well. So that's why the longevity comes from the relationship, because that will create the loyalty.
Yeah, it's like it just always goes back to like, it's just a human relationship dynamic where it's like, like for me, the example I always give is like, you meet someone for the first time, you may like them, but that doesn't mean you hand them your car keys and say like, hey, you can borrow my car for the day. But you would do that for a friend that you loved and trusted, someone who has a track record where you're like, hey, they're not just going to drive off to another state and sell my car, like, or, they're irresponsible or whatever. So like, it's the same kind of thing. Like you don't meet someone and hand them your keys. So like, there's not a chance that, like you said, they're going to read a blog post and all of a sudden, like they're going to move all their investments from where they've been for the last 10 years to you. Like that just doesn't even make sense, because no human relationship works that way.
Not ever. And it's the same thing if you meet someone, you don't ask them to marry you the next day, right?
Right.
You don't want to marry somebody after knowing them for one day because you don't know them, right? So it's the same thing. It's all about relationships, which over time builds trust and loyalty.
So I want to be respectful of your time, because we've been going for a while here, and I really appreciate that. But for the podcast, we're always talking about like bold marketing and doing new and different things. Just the death to vanilla idea is just the idea that vanilla content doesn't stand out, it doesn't get noticed, and it's not going to financially pay off for anyone. So if you're going to make content, you might as well make it stand out. So my question for you is, obviously banks, this is just my opinion, so please correct me if I'm wrong, tend to play it a little safe, right? Because they've got to appeal to a lot of people. A lot of people are offended by a lot of things, let's be honest. And so I feel like, playing it safe is not a smart or not a dumb move. But like, how have you seen them? Have you seen them do anything bold or interesting or different, or like what kind of things are they doing to like really stand out besides like being relational and stuff like what we talked about?
So some of them are starting to create podcasts. Which is good. So they're getting into and more video, which is great. And then we turn the videos and the podcast into blog posts, right? You can so a lot of them are getting into repurposing content, which is really, really good, because you can have. I'm always for all types of content. Like Netflix makes content, right? There's so many different kinds of content, so you can have video and the written form. It's always I'm a big advocate of providing as many different kinds of content, because you don't know how your ideal customer wants to consume it.
True.
Right? Some people may have time. Some people prefer reading than watching. Some people prefer listening than watching.
Yeah.
And you don't know that. So just provide it all. just do all, just do audio, do video, do written. And then it provides the variety, right? For different kinds of people. So you can, and that's why oftentimes you'll see video with transcripts, because some people just prefer to read. And some people can't listen. Like I've got a 1-year-old. If I'm putting him to sleep, I could maybe read something, right? Because that's more convenient. I don't want to listen to something and then he hears it and he doesn't go to sleep. So you always
Right.
want to meet your customer where they are. And the only way to do that is to provide a variety of content that will speak to them. So I do see a lot of um, financial institutions starting to move in that direction of the people, because that's all that matters. Move in the direction of the people, because if you stay and they move, you get left behind, right? So you always have to be where they are and be a part of the conversation that they're already having. That's really what it comes down to. No one wakes up and says, I'm going to buy a house today. They've already stalked realtor.com, zillow.com. They've spoken to friends and family. They've checked out different neighborhoods. You need to be a part of that conversation so that when they're ready to get a mortgage, they contact you, right? So that's really the big message. And they are starting to hear that, because people are all about relationships. Not only that, people are, wanting, their financial institution to meet them where they are, right? Rather than go to them, especially now with the pandemic where, people aren't going into branches. I mean, I wasn't going into branches before the pandemic. I don't even remember the last time. The last time I went to a bank was when we bought this house. Because because when we bought the rental, we didn't even have to go into the bank. Yeah, when we bought this house was the last time I went into a bank. Because you don't need to, right? So the banks need to meet the customers where they are.
They're just going to ask you to open up a checking account when you go in.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just a mindset thing. It's just, and the thing is, the mindset of, to some customers, the mindset of banks has been very old, very, old fashioned.
Yeah.
But now that I see some of them doing the podcast, and a lot of people are on Clubhouse now. Is it called Clubhouse? Yeah, Clubhouse.
Yes.
Oh, love Clubhouse. So I
haven't gone on yet. I've added it. I got an
Yeah.
invite, but I haven't spent any time on it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So, and that's just audio, right?
Yeah.
So, that is strictly audio. It's not video, and it's not, you can't re-listen to it. It's just, it's there and that's it. And then it's not. So it's, it's different. And if your ideal customer is there, be there, is really what I say. But I see them starting to make that change to paying attention to where their customers are and then going there.
Well, like, I don't know. So like, I'm just like looking at like the apps on my phone, and it's like, I have USAA, because my wife's dad was in the Coast Guard, and I love them, but I can assure you their blog feed is not on is not an icon on my home screen. You know what I mean? But, Twitter is, and TikTok is, and Instagram is. So if they're there, then I'll see their content and it'll build a relationship. But like, I ain't searching for their blog posts. You know what I mean? So it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, you're right. Like, you have to be where the customer is, because, otherwise, how are you supposed to talk to them? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. And then bring them back to your website, right? Then you go where they are, and then you bring them to you. You bring them to your party, but you have to go where they are so they know how to get to your party. Right?
That's 100% true. Well, that just goes back to creating the content that brings value and builds a relationship. Like, like no one's gonna, if you desperately need to, you will totally watch a video on how to apply for a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
But until then, like, people would probably put it on to fall asleep to, maybe. And you know what I mean? So then it's that point, it's like, okay, well, then you've got to be making other things that connect with people. And those other things are perfect for the apps that people actually use on their phone. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
you're not going to make a TikTok about applying for a loan. You know what I mean? But you might, it might be interesting to talk about, like, 3 hacks to like qualify for more or something like that. That might be kind of fun.
Or renovation or something, right?
Yeah.
Before and after pics of, because even you can even get a loan to renovate your house. Like, I mean, there's like, it still can all tie back, even though you're not specifically talking about it. You know what I mean? Like, especially now with the pandemic. I mean, lots of people are renovating their home. Like, we bought a couch the other day. We bought a couch in October. We just got it on Tuesday.
Holy crap.
We just got it on Tuesday, and we bought the couch in October. So, I mean, it's just the back
They were
order.
still growing the tree to build it, right?
I think they were, but so many people, I think because everyone's home, they're looking at their house and they're like, you know what? I don't like that. I don't like this. I'm going to buy some furniture. So like a lot of places are on back order. So renovation tips is perfect because people are renovating their house. They're wanting to buy new stuff and paint the walls and change the kids' rooms. And
Right.
you know, a lot of times people will get a loan to do that because they may not have, you know, $30,000, $40,000 to do what they want to do. So it's, you know, it still ties back to you, but you're giving them tips on, you know, how to decorate, how to, you know, decorate their living room or how to decorate their bedroom
Right.
or whatever. Yeah.
When you get your free money. Not really, but you know, it feels like free money. Oh man, good stuff. Well, thank you so much for jumping on here. I really appreciate it. I love your perspective. I love that you are, like you said, that you've been on both sides of the road. So, you know, it's been able to really help you create great content and really understand the customer better because you were the customer. So
I still am the customer.
yeah, right. Yeah. Will continue to be, right? And
We'll
so
continue to- exactly.
yeah. So until if you become ridiculously independently wealthy, I'm sure at that point you're like, I don't need a bank. I'll just buy everything with cash. But until then,
Well, you still have a bank account
yeah, that's true.
and
Yeah.
probably a credit card or a line of credit. I mean, the banks to me are just,
You're right. You're right.
you'll always have some type of relationship with them. Like
True.
who doesn't have a bank account or a line of credit or a credit card or something, some type of bank products, right? Even if you don't have a mortgage, you probably still have a bank account.
True. I have
Or-
since I was 16.
Exactly. Exactly.
So if you could just go ahead and just let us know how to reach out to you, so anyone who's listening to the podcast or watching this on the video can go find you and learn more about you.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn most often because that's where my ideal customer is. So that's where I am every day.
Right.
Yeah, so Shondell Varcianna is my handle on LinkedIn, and my website varcimedia.com, VARCI media.com. You can reach out to me there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wanna cause no problems. I just wanna live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but you know when you see imposters. We know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you wanna talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you walk and your talk is constant. Hey, I seen it all before. I heard chat that they all adore. 1 week looking like they all aboard. Next day they don't even walk the walk. I've been here since a bust down aqua, cutting through Asda, all black master. Now I'm too grown for acting gaffer, trying to pay off my madre's gaff cuz took the wife and there's a rotty that's peak.